What if I told you that in just 60 seconds, the balance of global politics shifted? That one man standing before the world's most powerful nations spoke a truth so bold, so precise, that it left entire governments speechless and millions around the globe inspired. This isn't fiction. This is real. In a time when world leaders speak in riddles, when diplomacy hides behind rehearsed lines and empty gestures, one voice rose with unshakable clarity, a voice that did not shout, but thundered in silence, a voice that didn't beg for attention, but commanded it. This is not just a story of a speech. This is the story of a moment that challenged empires, uplifted the ignored, and awakened a rising power. A moment that the world couldn't ignore, and neither should you. Stay with us till the very end as we walk through the words that changed everything. Because sometimes it only takes one sentence to rewrite the rules. And this was that sentence. At a globally televised summit, surrounded by heads of state and the watchful eyes of the international press, Dr. S. Jaishankar stood not just as India's external affairs minister, but as a voice for an emerging world that had grown weary of selective narratives and diplomatic doublespeak. In just under 60 seconds, he delivered a line so precise, so surgically calibrated, that it cut through the noise of long speeches and formalities. His words didn't come wrapped in aggression. They carried the weight of history, the sharpness of intellect, and the clarity of a nation that refuses to be patronized. In that moment, he didn't just speak for India. He spoke for every nation that had for decades been on the receiving end of one-sided lectures about democracy, human rights, and global order, often from countries whose actions contradicted their words. The power of that statement wasn't in its volume or theatrics. It was in the calm assertion of truth, a truth that called out the inconsistencies of Western powers who defended their own national interests under one set of rules while expecting others to play by another. The forum itself was no ordinary gathering, whether it was the United Nations General Assembly, G20, or high-stakes strategic dialogue. The audience included diplomats, defense experts, and world leaders whose countries had long shaped global policies. Yet in those few seconds, it was Jaishankar's words that became the headline, the replayed sound, in a moment that would reverberate across diplomatic corridors. Jaishankar chose not to speak in riddles or carefully veiled references. He opted for directness, confronting the hypocrisy that had long been accepted as the cost of doing international business. With the world watching, he questioned how nations that speak loudly about peace continue to profit from arms deals that fuel destruction in regions they claim to support. It was not just an accusation. It was a dismantling of the moral high ground many global powers had occupied for decades without challenge. What made his approach so striking was the precision with which he exposed the contradiction. He didn't need to name names. Everyone in the room and millions online knew exactly whom he was referring to. The timing was surgical, the setting deliberate, and the tone unmistakably unapologetic. In just a few words, he held up a mirror to those who design policies for others but shield themselves from accountability, dared to question the imbalance, the duplicity, and the silence that often follows uncomfortable truths. This wasn't mere rhetoric. It was diplomacy with a spine. While others may hesitate to offend powerful allies or risk economic fallout, Jaishankar leaned into the discomfort. The world has grown smaller, more informed, and far more interconnected. What was once hidden in policy documents and closed-door meetings now finds its way into viral sound bites and public scrutiny. And in this, for decades, India's diplomatic posture was rooted in non-alignment, cautious language, and a desire to maintain balance amid competing global powers. Its representatives often chose the path of quiet negotiation over public confrontation, careful to avoid offense in a world dominated by Western narratives. But with that one concise, unflinching statement, Dr. Jaishankar signaled a transformation, not just in tone, but in India's role on the world stage. He spoke not as a subordinate seeking validation, but as an equal, asserting a sovereign perspective grounded in national interest and historical memory. This shift did not emerge overnight. It was the product of evolving geopolitical realities, a rising economic profile, and years of subtle recalibration. What Jaishankar achieved in that 60-second moment was the embodiment of a long-building shift. India no longer sees itself as a passive recipient of global order, but as an active architect of it. His tone was not combative, but it was firm. It rejected paternalism. It refused to be cornered into taking sides on terms set by others. It was the voice of a confident nation that understands its power, its priorities, and its position in an increasingly multipolar world. That declaration became more than just a personal or institutional stance. It was a reflection of a collective national mindset, one that is done with appeasement, tired of double standards, and ready to engage the world on its own terms. Diplomacy for India had graduated from polite persuasion to strategic assertion. In global discussions where smaller voices are often overshadowed, Jaishankar's few words carried the weight of a billion. They reminded the world that India is no longer content with symbolic presence. It demands substantive influence. And from that moment onward, the tone of Indian diplomacy had irrevocably changed. When Jaishankar delivered his bold, no-nonsense statement on the global stage, it resonated far beyond the hall in which it was spoken. While many listened in silence, stunned by the clarity and courage of his words, the global South heard something else, a call to rise, to reclaim dignity, and to demand equity in international affairs. For nations across Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, his message echoed their own frustrations. These are countries that have long felt the weight of a global system designed without their voices, dictated by powers that speak of equality but act in hierarchy. Jaishankar's words, crisp and fearless, validated what many of these nations had felt for years, that it was time for a new alignment, one that did not revolve around old colonial centers, but rather reflected the realities of a new world. His statement provided more than moral support. It gave political confidence. Leaders from countries that often self-censor in international forums began to echo similar sentiments. They saw in India a model of how to speak truth to power without losing balance or respect. The idea that a country could challenge dominant narratives while still engaging constructively was both liberating and empowering. It opened space for conversations that had long been suppressed under the guise of diplomacy and aid dependency. This moment didn't just elevate India's standing, it shifted the collective mindset of emerging economies. It encouraged them to question the conditionalities tied to international assistance, to seek partnerships based on mutual respect rather than condescension, and to unify around common struggles such as development, climate justice, and fair trade. Jaishankar's 60 seconds became a symbol, a spark that lit the fire of solidarity across the global South, reshaping how these nations view themselves, their role, and their leverage in global politics. When Dr. Jaishankar made his sharp and deliberate remark during the Global Summit, it wasn't just heard by diplomats in suits. It was captured, clipped, and shared across every corner of the digital world within minutes. What began as a diplomatic response transformed into a viral moment, amplified by social media, news outlets, and political commentators. The brevity of his statement made it ideal for a soundbite, but it was the depth behind the words that gave it momentum. Audiences around the world were struck by how, in under a minute, one voice could pierce through layers of political correctness and speak with unapologetic clarity. Global media seized the clip, labeling it everything from a masterclass in diplomacy to a verbal reset of global norms. On platforms like Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram, analysts dissected every word, praising the calm authority in his tone and the firmness in his message. For many viewers, particularly in the younger generation, it was their first exposure to India's emerging assertiveness on the world stage, and it struck a chord. Memes, reaction videos, and multilingual subtitles spread across continents, reflecting how a single moment of truth could resonate universally. Political influencers and foreign policy experts began discussing its implications, not just for India, but for the architecture of global diplomacy. The impact of Jaishankar's powerful 60-second statement was magnified by the global environment in which it was delivered. The world today is in the midst of profound geopolitical shifts, marked by rising tensions in Europe, instability in the Middle East, growing distrust in Western institutions, and the increasing assertiveness of powers like China and Russia. In such a moment, when alliances are fluid and old frameworks are being questioned, the global audience is more attuned to voices that offer clarity, balance, and a fresh narrative. Jaishankar's statement was not only bold, but it was delivered at precisely the right time, a period when the world is actively rethinking power structures, influence, and who gets to set the rules. India, as one of the largest democracies and fastest growing economies, stands at a unique crossroad. It is no longer a passive observer, but a key player whose voice carries weight in shaping the future of global governance. Jaishankar's comment tapped into this new reality. It was not just what he said, but when he said it, that made all the difference. As nations grapple with inflation, war, energy crises, and post-pandemic recovery, they are more open to ideas that challenge the dominance of a few and promote equitable leadership. His timing aligned perfectly with the hunger for change, particularly from nations and populations and so in just 60 seconds, Dr. Jaishankar did not merely make a statement, he marked a shift in tone and power, in expectation. His words were not just for a single audience or a single nation. They echoed across continents, across generations, across long silent voices of the global South. That moment reminded the world that diplomacy does not always need pages of agreements or hours of speeches. Sometimes it only takes one voice speaking the truth with clarity and conviction to stir the course of global politics. In a world clouded with narratives, he brought focus. In a hall filled with power, he brought purpose. And in a time defined by division, he offered a reminder that dignity, sovereignty, and courage are not negotiable. Thank you for being a part of this journey. May these words inspire you to seek truth, to stand tall, and to speak boldly, even when the world isn't ready. Stay informed, stay empowered, and stay fearless. Good luck on your path forward, and may your voice, just like his, echo far beyond the moment.